I call to order the City of Bloomington Board of Zoning Appeals for May the 20th, 2021. Roll call, please.
Clapper,
Here.
Throckmorton,
Here.
Sandberg,
Here.
Husky,
Here.
and Burrell.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. We have approval of meeting minutes from November the 19th, 2020. I will entertain a motion, or if anybody has any comments.
Move approval of the minutes?
Have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Throckmorton,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Husky,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
and Clapper.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any reports, resolutions, and communications?
We only have one. This will be Cassandra Husky's last evening with us. And so we just want to say thank you very much for serving. It's been a pleasure, and wish it could be longer, maybe sometime again in the future. But we will be, of course, looking for another member. But thanks to her for taking this on and being with us for this last couple of years. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Cassandra. We'll miss you.
Miss you guys too. It just for what it's worth, this is because I no longer meet the residency requirement selling my downtown house. So
Okay. Okay. Well, best of luck to you. We'll see you around town. So we have a number of petitions that are continued to our June meeting. They are as follows: CU/V-19-20, Robert Iatorola, V-05-21, Nancy Armstrong, and V-06-21, David Kerber. This evening, we have two petitions we'll be hearing. They are AA-02-21, Acacia Investments LLC, and then AA-03-21, Whitehall Associates. Can we please have a staff report for the Acacia Investments case?
Yes, I am Liz Carter. I will be doing your staff report. I'm going to share my screen real quick, hopefully. Okay. All right, is that working? Hopefully it is.
Yep.
Okay. So this is an administrative appeal from Development Standards. The property is located at 615 West 15th Street. It's at the southeast corner of North Fairview and West 15th Street. The property is zoned R3 or residential small lot. The properties to the north, south, east, and west are all also zoned R3. So a grading permit was issued in July of 2019 for the parking lot and some other site work. The work included repaving and restriping the parking lot, some landscaping, bike parking, and then moving and enclosing the dumpster. In November of 2019, planning and transportation staff were asked to come inspect for final occupancy. At that time, we found a few outstanding items, including that the dumpster enclosure was not compliant. The other items were addressed, and the ownership expressed interest in appealing the dumpster enclosure opinion. So this is from the plan set that was approved for the grading permit. As you can see, the dumpster enclosure has a fence on two sides, a gate on one side, and then a partial fence with an opening. And then there is a retaining wall around three sides of it. The heights of these were not given with the plans that were approved. So when we came out to inspect, this is the dumpster enclosure. As you can see, the fence is nice and tall. It's a good 6 feet, but that gap in the fencing is exposed as the retaining wall is not very tall. You can see a little bit to the left of this picture, there is an alley, a public alley that runs alongside the property. And on the other side of that alley, there is a residence. And then this is kind of from the alley and the residence next door. This is sort of what it looks like from their perspective. So we issued a notice of violation warning in January of 2021 so that it could be appealed. And we were given written notice that they wish to appeal the violation. And so here's our notice of violation warning. Basically just that the dumpster did not meet outdoor storage standards because it wasn't enclosed on all sides. We gave a compliance deadline and also a date by which it needed to be appealed. And this is the section of the code that the notice of violation was referring to, simply that trash receptacles, dumpsters, things like that need to be enclosed on all sides, and that enclosure needs to be a minimum of 6 feet so that adjacent either parcels or public rights of way cannot see into the dumpster, so it's not visible to the neighbors essentially. And based on this, we are recommending denial of the administrative appeal of our notice of violation for violation of development standards, specifically outdoor storage.
Thank you, Liz.
No problem.
Is there a petitioner's representative here this evening?
Yes, I'm here. My name's Christine Bartlett.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay. You have up to 20 minutes to present your petition.
Okay, thank you. As I mentioned, I'm Christine Bartlett. I'm here on behalf of the petitioner. I'm with Ferguson Law.
Christine, it's a little difficult to hear you.
Okay, I'm going to try to move closer to my microphone, but please let me know if you still can't hear me. Is that any better?
Can others hear Christine? Okay, then we're good.
Okay, all right. You just wave at me or give my attention if I fade out again. Okay, great. All right. I thought it might be helpful first to give you an idea of how this project came about, and I'd like to share my screen if I could.
Sure, just a sec.
Okay.
You should be able to now.
Okay, and you should be able to see, hopefully now that I've shared my screen, this is what the property looked like before this work was done. As you can see, it's a parking lot that needed a lot of work. This is an older building. As Liz mentioned, it's at the corner of 15th and Fairview. Older building, but a lot of work's been put into the property to make it look better, including a couple of years ago, the owner wanted to do improvements to the parking lot. This is a lawful non-conforming property, so the scope of the work at the time, in our opinion, did not require building an enclosure, didn't require putting that into compliance. But as you can see, with the dumpster being over here just hanging out on its own, it didn't look very attractive. The owner wanted to move the dumpster over to the other side of the property and build an enclosure at the time that the dumpster was moved. So that work was done voluntarily. There wasn't an addition to the building at the time. There wasn't a change of use, an expansion or an enlargement of the use. So like I said, that was done just voluntarily. Now let me pull something else up. So when the owner submitted the plans to the city, as Liz showed you, this is what was provided. And it did depict that the property would have an opening. The dumpster enclosure would have an opening. As you can see here, there's nothing here. There's no fencing material and no retaining wall. The city does say that the plans didn't show the height of the retaining wall, but to that I would raise 2 points. First, it doesn't really make sense that the plans would have indicated a retaining wall and a gate at the same height. If you see this side here and this back here, they would have just been butted up against each other. And that wouldn't have quite made any sense to have them be the same height. Otherwise, the retaining wall itself just could have served as the enclosure. And second, even that, the height issue notwithstanding, the plans clearly depict that there's an opening. There's an opening right here and then right here. And that was done intentionally. That was done so that if somebody with mobility issues is coming up to the dumpster, they can simply walk through here, put their stuff in the dumpster, and then go out. But it still has an aesthetically pleasing appearance to it. The new enclosure, we admit it does have this opening. Like I said, it was an intentional plan to do that, and it was built as submitted to the city. No changes were made from these plans here. And had the owner known that this was going to be an issue after construction, there would have been probably a pretty substantial redesign of the enclosure. As it is now, and I'll show you some pictures, there aren't really good options for adding a gate to fully enclose this the way the city wants it to be enclosed. Let me pull up a couple pictures here. This is a front view of the enclosure, and this shows that that opening here, that L-shaped area where somebody could walk through and then walk through to the enclosure to put their trash. And this is a depiction from the side. If we were to try to put something here at the front, obviously that's not going to work well. That's not going to come up to 6 feet. That's not going to solve the problem. If we're to try to put something here, we potentially have a couple problems. That's going to create an issue for somebody that's going through here to try to maneuver the door outward. Or if we have it swing inward, if the dumpster's put back in the wrong location, that could potentially block the entrance to the enclosure. So at this point, we have some issues with trying to bring the enclosure into what the city would consider to be compliance with this. The concerns about the aesthetic, we contend shouldn't really be an issue. Obviously, it's a nice looking enclosure, but also the one spot where you can see anything from the dumpster, and let me just pull up the picture so you can see what you can also see. If you turn around in that exact same spot, what you see over here are 3 toters that the neighbor just has right out next to the house. And I was there just last week. This has been the same from last year to this year, just as recently as last week. And then if you look across the street on 15th Street, same issue here. Again, the only place where the dumpster is at all visible is in one portion of the alleyway. It's not at all visible from the public road. And otherwise, it's an aesthetically pleasing looking enclosure. So for those reasons, we would ask that the BZA grant our appeal.
Thank you. We are to the board for questions for staff or for petitioner.
I'll start off with a couple if you don't mind, Mary.
Please.
Thank you. This will be to staff. Did the grading permit for the parking lot trigger a requirement for an upgrade to the dumpster to be within code?
The moving of the dumpster required an upgrade for it to be in code.
Okay, so they could have done all the work on the parking lot and then just left the dumpster as is where it is, without any fencing.
Theoretically, yes, I believe so.
Okay. Second question is, why did the staff approve the initial plans without understanding the height and the appellant said that it was clear that there was no door or wall there? How did that get through?
Sure. So the when it was approved, as you saw, we approved a plan view set, and then oftentimes there are specs in the plan that show the height. We did not know what the height of the retaining wall was, but we do know what the requirement is in code. And so I believe an assumption was made by the staff member that that would be met with the retaining wall.
So that was just at this moment, you believe that was just an assumption by a staff member that overlooked that assumed.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I think there's a point to be made that even if you all or we thought there was a staff error that was made, even if there had been a height in there and it was 4 feet and we had accidentally approved that, it doesn't meet code. And so when we figure out that it doesn't meet code, we can come back and say, hey, you got to put something in that meets 6 feet. That isn't what happened in this case, but even if that is what happened, we could still, code requires 6 feet, and that's just why we are requiring that.
Okay, I just have two other quick questions. One is, are the toters the same as a dumpster?
To who are you asking?
To staff. Are the toters that were being referred to as being next to the houses, are they viewed by the city the same as dumpsters?
The outdoor regulations are different for single family and multifamily or commercial.
Which means the toters they're not required to be behind some kind of a screening?
No, Liz, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
I do not believe so.
No, with the toters that the city issues to residential properties, the only requirement is that after trash day is over, that they're pulled back up to the house.
So those two issues, the dumpster and the toters, those are completely irrelevant to each other, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then the last thing I had is, would the staff agree that if a sliding wall were installed in that opening, that would meet code, or does it have to be a swinging gate, or what's the option that the city would give to the appellant?
So I think there's a couple options in this case. A swinging door would be an option. A sliding door, I think, is the one I originally spoke with the gentleman on site when we looked at it together. Additionally, if you would let me share I'm going to share my screen real quick and kind of indicate if that's okay. Okay. So as we're looking at, can you guys see this okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As we're looking at this enclosure, you can see that it's not that the wall and the fence are really separate. And if this portion right here towards the middle, the fence is actually kind of on top of the wall, that could be extended forward to the corner and then over, just so that the entire thing is screened. So the fence and gate, it doesn't necessarily need to be a fence or a gate, as long as the 6-foot wall was built on top of the retaining wall to continue around to fully screen the gap, if you will, from the neighboring property.
Okay, thank you for those responses, and thank you, Barry. That's all.
Sure. Anyone else at this time have questions? Yes, Susan?
Yes. How many tenants are residing? It's Fairview Terrace, correct? That would be for the petitioner.
Yes, give me just 1 second and I can tell you that.
And then my follow-up question, are any of them handicapped at this time that either have to get about through a walker or some sort of a wheelchair, where this design actually would be quite accommodating to your tenants?
To answer your first question, there are 24 one-bedroom units, and some of those are first floor. I don't know at this moment if we have anyone with mobility issues. I know that we have had. I just don't know if those people are currently still tenants. And we do have at least one handicap parking spot.
Okay, thank you.
I'll ask a question of the petitioner. Extending the screen on top of a wall just in sort of a little L shape to lap over would not inhibit in any way the handicapped accessibility aspect of the design. which is, we see around town quite a lot actually, where you just have the screens that kind of overlap to provide that complete closure from the outside, but still allows people to get in and around without having to manipulate a door or something like that. Would that be amenable to you?
I don't know whether or not that would be feasible. I mean, it certainly seems that it would be a possibility the way it was described. I don't know that it would still meet the city's interpretation of code, because there would still be that open area. It's not fully enclosed with a gate. It's now just a different shape. But yeah, that would not inhibit the accessibility concern that I expressed. You're correct about that.
Elizabeth or Jackie, could you please clarify whether that would be acceptable to the city and meet the ordinance?
Sure. I think absolutely it would. We do see other developments that do something like this, where they have sort of almost like a little tunnel way into the side where there's no gate, for this similar concern of those with accessibility needs. Yes.
Okay, so that would meet the full screening requirement.
Right. The goal, of course, is that from any neighboring properties, that when you look at the dumpster, you cannot see it, that it's fully screened. So if it's screened by having a little tunnel in on the side, that would still be fine.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, then we are to the public. Is there anyone from the public here this evening who would like to comment on this petition? Seeing none, we are back to the petitioner's representative for final comment.
Thank you. Again, we're just asking that the BZA grant our appeal on this. As I showed, this was not work that the owner had to do to begin with. When the plans were submitted, they were submitted completely accurately to the city, and the city approved them, and the dumpster enclosure was built completely as the plans indicated. And for those reasons, we're just asking that the BZA grant our appeal on this matter.
Okay, thank you. We're back to the commission for action or discussion. Susan?
I certainly have empathy for the petitioner in that what is there now is certainly more aesthetically pleasing than what had been there. And when I heard that, their improvements were done on a voluntary basis, that is compelling. On the other hand, I think a workaround has been offered. And so I would hope that the petitioner would be amenable to that enclosure and still be able to keep that entryway for accessibility. I think that is a really great idea as well. So, but I'm hopeful that they can make those small accommodations to get it back to what we hear from Ms. Carter would be acceptable.
Right.
I'll put a motion on the floor for denial of administrative appeal -03-21.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you.
And then my comments for the reason for that motion are because it would, with the movement of the dumpster, which is what the property owner wanted to do, then they have to come up to code. That's the way it is. I felt staff answered the question about it is up to the builders to know what the code is. And as Susan just stated, there is what appears to be a solution that's easily achieved. Again, for BZA, it's not an issue of money. We don't take that into consideration. We take into consideration if it's a peculiar instance, and there is none here.
I just want to add that I commend the owner for going that little bit farther distance to make the property to be better neighbors with the surrounding properties and moving the dumpster. And I think that there is a fairly easy modification that can meet your needs and also meet the ordinance that everyone in the city needs to meet. So I want I will be voting to deny this administrative appeal as well. Any other comments? If not, we are ready to go to a vote.
So the motion on the floor is to deny administrative appeal AA 0221. Sandberg? So a
Yes.
yes is a no vote. Thank you. Husky?
Yes.
Burrell?
Yes.
Clapper?
Yes.
And Throckmorton?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We are on to our next case, which is AA-03-21 Whitehall Associates. Staff report, please.
Yes, just one sec. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. So this appeal is for the property located at 3477 West 3rd Street, on the corner of West 3rd Street and the I-69 bypass. This appeal request is the result of an administrative decision to deny a sign permit application at 3477 West 3rd Street. Like I said, the property is located off of West 3rd Street near the I-69 bypass. This property at the time was zoned planned unit development. When they filed, that was the zoning for the property. Because of the recent zoning changes, it's now zoned MC, mixed use corridor. But for the sake of this petition, it's a planned unit development. So some background for the PUD is that the PUD was allowed 4 pole signs to be developed. 3 of the pole signs were permitted and existing on the site since the 1980s or so. The 4th and final pole sign was applied for on November 25th, 2020, and was permitted on February 9th, 2021. A sign permit application for the property at 3477 West 3rd Street was received on February 9th, 2021, and denied on February 23rd, 2021, because the allowable signage for the PUD had been completely used up, so no new signage could be permitted at that time. And so the petitioner is requesting an appeal of that decision to deny sign permit application C21060. Just for some additional context, here's the 4th pole sign that was approved. And this was the sign that the petitioner applied for that was denied. And so based on the findings in the report, the department recommends denial of AA-03-21, and we can answer any questions that y'all have.
Okay. Thank you. Petitioner's representative?
This is Mike Carmen. Assume all is on okay? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you have up to 20 minutes.
All right. Thank you. We represent Whitehall Associates, which is the appellant, would have been the applicant for the sign permit that Keegan just spoke about that was denied. Just as an initial comment, you might have noticed that the sign permit that was approved looked by design looked very similar to the one that is denied, because this is not a request that Whitehall Associates be given any special dispensation. This is not a variance. Obviously, it's an appeal of a decision by department or department head to deny the sign permit application that Whitehall Associates had submitted, and would ask you to reverse that. And to cut to the chase, the reason that for the appeal is that the permit issued on February 9th that Keegan referred to was improperly issued. The 4th sign pole permit that's available in this PUD is owned by Whitehall Associates. It was their permit to apply for, it was their sign to apply for, not and when they chose. Brian Rental, which is the party identified on the permit application for the one that's approved, had no sign rights, had no right to the full sign, and they knew it. And actually the city corporation council had already said that in December of 2018, Ms. Guthrie had in an email advised Brian Rentals that the use of that pole sign, that fourth sign that they've now been given a permit for, required the consent of Whitehall Associates. And yet staff has approved that permit anyway. So let's go back through them and how we got here. Now, if I'm kicking around, or Jackie, I guess whoever is controlling, if I may do share screen, I want to use the staff report, but I'll run through it at my pace to make it easier instead of asking you to keep going.
You should be able to, yeah.
Okay, all right. Let me make sure I've got that on. So. Okay. All right. So this is the staff action denying the report that started this evening. This is in the staff report. It shows PUD. Just to be clear, this is no longer applicable. The PUD actually covers the Kmart area that's shown here to the right. It actually goes further to the west. That picks up what you'll know is the Kroger Plaza over there. The original PUD that was approved in 1979 was a much bigger area than what this is depicting. One way it's easier to lose track of that is that Liberty Drive did not exist at that time in 1979. It didn't bisect this PUD property north to south like it does now. So the Kroger property to the west of Liberty Drive is actually part of the original PUD approval. And this is, you can see the Kmart there, of course, is no longer Kmart. That's now the At Home. You might have noticed on that first sign that Keegan showed that has been approved, that permit has At Home as a tenant panel at the top of that sign. You'll also know this property, if you've ever been out there, if you'll remember it by the huge sign. The huge Kmart sign that used to be out there is now At Home. And that is one of the 4 pole signs that this property, this Kmart property, owned in part by Bryan Rentals, is now asking for second of the 4 pole signs. There's no other pole sign associated with this property. They don't own that right. And we would submit that what the approval of that permit and the denial of the Whitehall Associates sign permit constitutes a taking of that property right, that pole sign that's permitted on this property. Let's go through why the staff packet, the staff files, the planning department files are full of documents that demonstrate that Whitehall Associates owns that 4th sign, that the rights to that 4th pole sign, and that Bryan Reynolds had never been granted. As a matter, maybe it's more technical, this is the application that was filed. This is what's in the staff report. I obtained a copy of the same thing on a public records request, and there are problems with this. This sign should never have been granted or permitted based on this application. First of all, it's not signed by anybody. It identifies the business at the top is Bryan Rentals. You know, Bryan Reynolds apparently didn't look at this because the name's not even spelled correctly. That's not how you spell Bryan Reynolds. But more to the point, in the end, the staff in the packet, the last few pages, it's actually pages 44 through 50 or so, through 49 of the packet, is the deed for this property, that what it was the former Kmart property that Bryan Reynolds and Crane LLC now own. Bryan Reynolds is not even the owner of the property involved, of the property that was covered by this application. It's a part owner. It has a partner, a co-owner, Crane LLC. I have never, ever seen a zoning petition in this community, actually in the several others where I practice, that has accepted an application by an owner of only a partial interest in the property. Bryan Reynolds does not own the property. Bryan Reynolds in part owns the property. Crane LLC is a co-owner, a tenant in common owner with an interest in the property, and that's the deed that's in the packet, starting on page 44. So I believe that the permit, the application submitted on behalf apparently of Bryan Rentals, however you want to spell it, is defective and should never have been approved to begin with. But as to Whitehall Associates' entitlement to this sign permit, we'll go forward to it. Oops, we ended up way too far. Get back to where I tend to be. Apologize for this. Okay, so there, we're back to the PUD. The application by Bryan. This was part of what they submitted. This is the application by Whitehall Associates. identifying the owner. They own all the property involved, and the sign permit application. Identifies the location, the sign, what it would be. You'll notice that there's nothing in the staff report or Keegan's recitation of facts that indicates that the sign itself that was the subject of permit did not meet the sign requirements of the PUD. It only makes reference to not meeting the sign permits required by the UDO, but then the UDO does not apply, which is what he noted. The reason staff said it does not comply with the UDO is if there's no pole sign available in this PUD, then any new sign would have to meet UDO standards. But because this is still the fourth sign under the PUD, then it's the standards for the sign that the PUD provides. So I'd ask you to look at a few of the pages. These come from the staff files. They're available different ways. This document is, find the page for you. There, get back to the top. Page 25, this is my letter on the appeal. Going through the problems that we tried to provide index of the different pages that were taken from staff files or plan commission files, or actually some even from city attorney's files. But this document, Exhibit 1, page 29 in the packet, is a letter from John Urbans on behalf of Whitehall Associates to Tim Miller, who was then the planning director, very long time planning director for the city of Bloomington. This and then the next document are two letters almost back to back. This one a little bit formatted a little differently, but it's to Tim regarding this PUD, the phasing of the development. It's broken into 5 phases. Phase 2, you see on this page being described as what will be the Kmart facility. So that was planned for in all this. And then future phases that Whitehall Associates would be developing on the property on the full build out. And you can see the letter, just the details of the letter, you can read if you need to, but it really wanted to make the point that this is intentionally a protracted development, and it covered, you can see it by description, there's phases 3, 4, and 5 on this last paragraph or page of that letter. These are Plan Commission minutes. You can see the date, January 1980. This started in 1979. You can see the petition number there in that right-hand corner. This is page 35 of the packet. The petition number 60-79. PCD, we refer to them as PUDs. There are times, and in the old ordinances, they refer to some of them as planned commercial developments. Essentially, PUD is just terminology. But this is just a general description of the PUD proposal, the outline plan of what was being proposed for this rezoning as a PUD. And this is all by Whitehall Associates. You don't see Brian Reynolds or anyone else involved. This is Whitehall Associates as the developer. You can see for the first time, I want to point it here, we're going to find it again. You see reference to Tim Miller there in a single line about in the middle of the page. Mr. Miller discussed drainage, landscape, and sidewalks. There are a lot of issues involved in this PUD, as there often are in PUDs and almost any development, but they're very specific development standards and requirements, basically impositions on Whitehall Associates of what they'd have to do. Things are going to cost money to be expended. But these are the burdens that go with owning this PUD. That one of the benefits that go with owning this PUD were the 4 permitted pole signs that were part of the approval process. Additional staff minutes. This is page 36 in the packet. I'm going to jump ahead and not take you through every page here to page 39 in the packet. And these are minutes of the BZA now. This, interestingly, is going to be, it appears there toward the bottom of the page, Waldorf Associates. This is going to be the Kmart property. This is a request for a variance by the then owner of that property, requesting a variance not only to use one of the 4 pole signs to locate at this location, but also is going to be much larger than what even the PUD standards were going to allow. And so they applied for a variance and ultimately was approved, and that's why the Kmart now, the at-home sign appears out there and is as large as it is. But what is significant in this is you can see some areas I highlighted in yellow. It's a little bit faint. It refers to the signage package for Whitehall Plaza, that Kmart is an element. It describes the fact that the 4 permitted pole signs, one of those was utilized with the Farmers and Mechanic Savings Loan property that fronts up on 3rd Street. This one will be number 2. There's already a plan for the third sign, and then there's a reference to the fourth sign is just basically being held in abeyance. There's not an immediate plan for use of that yet. This just happened to be that in the Brian Reynolds application was in the packet again. So go back to this letter. This is a letter submitted on that variance for the what became the Kmart sign. Again, that's one of the 4 pole signs that permitted. The second one that's actually put into use. Notice the middle paragraph on this letter that was submitted as part of the variance. Whitehall Associates, the developer of Whitehall Plaza, have agreed to permit Waldorf Associates to utilize one sign for the Kmart store, which would ordinarily be used only for the full development. Therefore, this request will not result in a greater number of signs at Whitehall Plaza than permitted by ordinance. In other words, planning staff, BZA, everybody knew that Whitehall Associates owned and controlled the pole signs. Here we have the applicant for variance to want to make use of one of those is discussing in his application letter for the variance that Whitehall Associates is the developer and that this will be one of the 4 pole signs that they're consenting to being used at this location. There's low easy read there at the top. So we're not adding the number to the 4 pole signs permitted. We're making use of them or allowing Waldorf Associates to become the Kmart Plaza to make use of one of those 4 signs. This again, now we're back to the deed again. There is one interesting page I'd like to look at, and actually held it here. Let me skip back up to the beginning. Not there, sorry. Had it marked, sorry. I didn't leave you. I'm fumbling, unfortunately, to find my page number for the one I wanted to show you. There we go. That's it, actually, right there. I will try to enlarge this, make it easier to read. It's in your packet. In case you want to look at it directly in your packet, you see it's page 28. This is an email exchange between Corporation Counsel, Philippa Guthrie, and Brian Reynolds, actually through their attorney, Andrew Shelf. There's actually a long series of emails that Mr. Brian Reynolds had tried off and on to get control of this pole sign over the years. And what you see in this response from Ms. Guthrie to them, you see the Andy, that's the reference to the attorney for Brian Reynolds. She's responding to his request. They're discussing the Kmart sign and what was approved and how that fit into the effect of the UDO that would not allow that pole sign now. And go to the very last line, is highlighted in yellow. The placement of this 4th sign would use the remaining allowance for the entire development. Get this over here so you can see it, sorry. This placement of this 4th sign would use the remaining allowance the entire development, and we would therefore require a letter of approval from the other owner of the PUD for this 4th sign. That's Whitehall Associates. In 2018, Bloomington Corporation Counsel opined that Whitehall Associates owns this sign right, and they would have to consent to the use of this sign by in this case, Brian Reynolds. And look what this has done. Not only have they taken, by approving the permit that Brian Reynolds applied for, in direct conflict with Corporation Counsel's statement that Whitehall controls this and owns it. And how and why that got ignored here in February of this year, I cannot explain. I have my suspicions, but I don't know. There's no record of why. All we know is that Brian Reynolds applied for the sign permit and it was granted. And it's particularly concerning that that happened because we had direct contact with the planning department before that got issued. And we were, frankly, I was assured that it would not happen. Secondhand report came down that this suddenly somebody in city legal had decided this was a race to the courthouse. First supply gets the sign. And that's impossible. There's no property right that is a race like that. But in any event, having heard rumors that someone was saying this is a race, first one to apply for the sign will get it issued to them, I contacted planning and I actually spoke with Keegan. And I was told that that would not happen. They knew that there was a dispute on whether Brian Reynolds had a right to even apply for the sign. They knew Whitehall Associates would be applying for a sign. I was assured that this permit would not be issued, and it happened anyway. And I really object on that grounds of everything else. But so what we end up with is Whitehall Associates owns this. It's a property right. It's theirs. It's been taken from them by the actives purportedly approving this sign permit in favor of Brian Reynolds on a defective petition. Brian Reynolds didn't have the right to even apply for it, and that permit should never have been granted. Now, my contention and what we'd ask of you is that you overturned the denial of the Whitehall Associates permit. There's no defect in the permit, the application based on the based on PUD standards. So it could have and should have been permitted. It was only denied on the belief, erroneous assumption, or whatever, that there was no sign permit left available. The fourth pole sign was already gone. It wasn't. I don't know what you do or what they will do with Brian Reynolds. We're not interested in, I'm certainly not interested in any way interfering with Brian Reynolds, whatever they're choosing to do with the property, as long as it's lawful, they can go for it. We're not objecting to that. We're not objecting to their desire to put up a sign. But we do object that their desire to put up a sign is at our cost. It is by the act of approving that sign permit apparently is the basis to take a sign permit owned by Whitehall Associates away from them. And that needs to be overturned. The denial of the permit needs to be reversed, and the permit submitted by Whitehall Associates, the application be approved so that we can draw the permit and make use of the fourth sign. This has been coming, the city has known since early February this appeal was coming. Why they did not act to suspend the permit.
1 minute left, Mike.
Thank you. Why they did not act to suspend the permit to Brian Reynolds until this got sorted out, I do not know. They could have. They still couldn't even now. Brian Reynolds certainly knows this is pending. I made sure of that. And I don't think anybody's here tonight. So you go through any of those staff papers, every one of them talks about Whitehall Associates as a developer, that the 4 pole signs were part of the overall development. Whitehall remains the developer with the right to that 4th pole sign, and we would submit that the denial of the permit of the application should be reversed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carmen. We are to the board for questions of staff and petitioner. Who would like to begin?
I'm happy to go if no one else is ready, Barry.
Okay.
So let's start with the last part there. This will be a question for staff, which is how do you respond to or address the issue that was outlined on page 28 in the email from Philippa Guthrie that appears to state clearly that Whitehall must release the rights? What's the staff's response to that argument?
So this is Mike Rooker. I'm the city attorney for the city of Bloomington. I'm going to be speaking some here as well tonight. So in response to that, I just want to clarify, I do not agree with Mr. Carmen's characterization of that final sentence there that's highlighted by Mr. Carmen. That does not indicate that Whitehall Associates is the owner of the sign rights there. It simply states that if either Brian Rentals or Whitehall Associates were to obtain approval, there would be, and the verb that's used there, staff would require approval from the other owner. I think that that's an unfortunate use of the verb require there, and I think that's a mistake. Certainly, we would prefer that these two parties, these two separate owners, Brian Rentals and Whitehall Associates, speak to each other and communicate to sort out their private dispute before they come to the city. That is our strong preference. And I think when you look at it, it's not clear that there is any such requirement. And I don't know where any such requirement exists in code or in any of the PUD documents or anywhere else. I've never seen such a requirement that consent would be required from another owner in this particular circumstance.
Thank
So
you.
I think on some level,
Thank you, Mike. That's sufficient. Thank you.
So if I could follow up, Mr. Rooker, so there's nothing in our ordinance right now that requires that an owner, or how is that defined, an owner of a property is the party that applies for, who has permitting privileges? How does that define in the code, or is it defined in the code?
yeah, and Jackie, you may have some input here as well. I think that is precisely the issue. And Mr. Carmen and I have spoken some about this. On some level, our strong preference would be that Bryan Rentals and Whitehall Associates take their dispute to a judge, sort out who's got rights to what sign, or try to come to some sort of agreement privately between the two of them. Obviously, this dispute has been ongoing for many, many years. Planning staff has been placed in the middle of it. And I think, Mr. Carmen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I hope that you will, but on some level, he believes that this appeal to this body is a prerequisite to him preserving all of his clients' rights so that he can take this dispute ultimately to a judge to sort out with Bryan Rentals, who in fact has rights to that fourth sign on the property, which is of course what we would like to see happen. We don't have a preference for either party having the sign. We do know that there are 4 signs that are permitted. If a judge were to order us to give that allotment to one party or the other, we'd be happy to comply with that requirement from a judge.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No,
I was gonna.
I'm sorry, Jack, if you have something to add.
That's okay. To add to your question, so the owner in this case, it's not one owner who owns the whole PUD, right? It's multiple owners, and the definition of owner says that persons, that it could be corporation, corporations. So the regulation for 4 signs is for the PUD. The PUD doesn't have single ownership anymore. Did it have single ownership in 1980 when it was, when that was approved, or however old this is? Maybe, but that has changed, and we feel like the allowance for the 4 signs was for the PUD as a total. So an owner in the PUD requested a sign, and we can't not issue that sign. There's nothing that we can do to say that they don't meet the requirement, which is being in the PUD. Does that make sense?
So at this time, is there a stay on the production of that first sign, or how does that work? Is the city?
No, we issued the permit. We found no reason that we could not issue it. And so we issued that permit. And if they want to put it up, they can. I will note, and Keegan or Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, this PUD was rezoned last week in the update. So this, limit of number of signs, rural regulations from a 40-year-old PUD, that's all gone. So any of these sites can use our existing current sign regulations and apply for sign permits. And I'm not sure what the availability is for each site at this point. But I do know that it's not number limited based on, the random geometry of this PUD to 4. Does that make sense?
So
Sorry.
I would just, if I might, just one more small point there. I do want to emphasize that Mr. Carmen, who is an attorney with many more years of experience than I have, if he wanted to go and request a stay, he certainly would have the ability to exercise legal rights to potentially request a stay on behalf of his client, if you believe there might be some sort of harm that his client would suffer if the sign went up for Bryan Rentals.
May I ask a question to staff along those lines?
Excuse me, 1 second, Joe. I think Flavia had a question.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, it's just, can you clarify, of course, with the name Bryan Rentals, it gives you the impression that they are leasing the place. So can we clarify who are the owners of the PUD? I mean, can we list them?
We could. So basically, if you go to the Elevate site, I think there's something like I want to say less than 15, maybe 12 different parcels in this PUD. Some are owned by Whitehall Associates LP. This one in particular, obviously owned by the Bryan Rental group with the crane. And then of course, those along 3rd Street, those are also in this PUD. They're all owned by separate LLCs typically, or different incorporations. We know Bryan Rentals in this town as it is a group that owns many buildings. Some are rentals and others are commercial. And so I think that that's just their business name. It doesn't necessarily indicate in this situation that this is a rental site.
Thank you.
Joe?
I wanted to address the unsigned application. Why was it unsigned, and is it common to approve a permit that's unsigned?
I would
Is
say,
it legal? Is it actually binding if it's not
sure,
signed?
I can let Mr. Rucker comment on that. I would say it is, I would not call it common. Typically in pre-COVID times, you know, we meet with people when they apply for things. In COVID times, a lot is done via email, and I think it was just missed that it wasn't there. And then I don't know if Mr. Rucker can address.
Yeah, I don't think that defect was noticed in the application. And Keegan, you can jump in and correct me until the approval had been issued. Is that correct, Keegan?
Yeah, that's correct.
And that's the sort of defect that can be corrected after the fact. Of course, if a court were to determine that that was the sort of material defect that would render the application void and change the application date so that that application actually has an application date sometime after the application that was submitted by Whitehall Associates, we'd be happy to comply with an order. But that's something I would encourage Mr. Carmen to take to a judge to sort out whether or not that's the sort of defect that would render that application void or change the effective date of the application submitted by Bryan Rentals. If that makes sense.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'd like to ask a question, please.
Yes, please.
So our guidelines say in a situation like this, if there's multiple owners of a property, any one of them could come and request use of rights that are applicable to the entire property without getting the permission of the others, that's not necessary according to our guidelines. And also that the use of any of those permits is just based on first come, first serve.
So I will comment on the second one. It is typical in lots of different circumstances with government agencies where there are a limited number of licenses or permits or items available. You know, an obvious example I think most people are familiar with are alcohol permits. There's a finite number. Who gets it first depends on who submits the application first. It's that simple. Submits a complete application and is eligible for it first. This is obviously we're dealing here with a much smaller number of permits, and there is a great deal of vitriol between two different parties involved here in a longstanding dispute. So that adds a little bit of intensity to the situation, but I don't believe there's any legal reason it would be interpreted than any other situation where there is a finite number of permits available from a government entity.
And I would say to the first portion, we had been dealing with Bryan Rental as a user at this site. And again, you know, there are something like 12 owners here, and they all are on different parcels. So when one parcel comes in to request something, we don't require that the other 11 sign off on that because they're in the same PUD.
Does it have anything to do with the location of the sign? Like could, you know, Freddy's put their sign on the Planet Fitness?
Sure, good question. The code prescribes where they can be, and whether or not you can have off premise, for example. So, you know, as Mr. Rooker alluded to, there is a long-standing issue at this PUD in particular related to signs with a large sign that is on 3rd Street that is owned by one party and it's on another party's property. And that's not something we get involved in. But we currently, in current code, we would only allow you to put a sign up on your own property. for the use or whatever. So for example, when Freddy's wanted to put up signs, they had to figure out a way to do it on their property and or use the multi-tenant center sign that was owned by someone else, but we would not be involved in that second part.
Okay, and was the rush of the two owners to get this done related to the change in code?
Yes.
I don't know why that came up.
I would discourage staff from speculating as to their motivations there.
Thanks.
You could direct that question, Cassandra, to Mr. Carmen if you'd like, since he's representing.
Yeah, well, I guess my reason for asking is I'd like to know, if the change in code changes their ability to put up a sign and how that might affect them.
Would you like Mr. Carmen to respond to that?
No, actually, I was wondering if the staff could tell
Sure.
me the new code would.
Yeah, Keegan, you can correct me if you know the answer. I'm just not sure that we have gone through the steps of seeing what the new options would be. We've only had the text amendments approved since the last Plan Commission meeting. So they could have been changed at council. So I'm not sure if we did that, if Keegan, if you did that, looked into the future of what the future options are.
I have not. And yeah, I just wanted to add that I have not reviewed the sign permit that they applied for under current code. So I can't say whether or not the sign would be permitted under the current zoning.
Okay. When we're talking about the additional sign that was, the second sign that was.
Yes, the one that was denied, yes.
Okay.
If I could also say, I think I don't know if it's a fair characterization to say like a rush to get the permit in. Brian Rentals applied for a sign. We get, 50, 75 sign applications a year. We tried to track down, this is something if you were involved, Susan Sandberg can comment on something if you were involved in the UDO update. PUDs are messy and the old ones are the worst. And we got an application. We tried to track down how best to administer it. And also additionally, then another party became interested in doing a sign application. And we weren't encouraging or, suggesting to anyone that they move quickly to get it done, only responding to documents that and applications and requests that we were receiving.
And there is no obligation, like we said before, there's no notification that there's nothing triggered that when one part owner of a property applies for something such as this, that there needs to be any other notification of this.
Correct. So then, yes, I would also like to make the point, I think it's kind of muddled a little because there are two permits that they are appealing our decision to deny their permit. They missed the window to appeal the issuance of the first permit. So whether or not the first permit is valid, we issued 4 permits. We can't issue a 5th permit. The issue of whether or not the 4th permit is valid isn't what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about whether or not we could issue a 5th permit, and we couldn't. Does that make sense? I mean, they're very obviously related, but they can't appeal whether or not the time limit passed. They can't appeal whether or not that 4th permit was valid here. So they're just appealing our decision not to issue a 5th permit. We think the PUD is very clear that 4 permits are allowed. We issued 4, and that's all we could do.
I see.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification and reminder.
Anything further from commissioners?
Yes.
Mr. Carmen?
Yes, thank you.
If you can hold on for one moment, let me see if there are any other questions, and anyone else?
I just want to thank you. I just want to restate in my own words what Jackie last said to make sure that I'm clear about that. The only issue at hand here is that they cannot issue a 5th permit because all have been issued. Is that correct?
Yes, they are appealing our decision to deny their 5th permit. to deny their permit, which we are saying is a 5th permit in a PUD that only allows 4. And that's why we couldn't issue it.
But we're not arguing whether this is a 5th permit.
You are not deciding whether or not Brian Rental was eligible for a 4th permit. I think that's kind of a separate issue. Like Mr. Rooker said, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, if a judge decides that that permit was issued invalid, not validly, what's the word here, guys? And takes that permit, says we have to revoke that permit, then we can issue a 4th permit to someone else.
Got it. So a lot of what we've been discussing here really is irrelevant to the question at hand.
It's tangential, yes.
Okay, but it gives us the background to understand
Yes,
why
right. So
we're
it's,
here.
right.
So just to put a finer point on it, because this application was made on February 9th, that predates the change or the adoption of the latest revisions, correct? So,
Correct.
So that's why you guys haven't gone ahead and done any further review based on what is now the revised code.
Right, yes. So we don't have a current application in front of us to look at. We have plenty of active things to
It's
do.
already been acted on.
Right, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I will note, Mike, you'll have to, your characteristic fast talk because you only have about 30 seconds left.
Well, there's a whole lot more than 30 seconds to say, but I guess I won't be allowed. So there's no vitriol. Mr. Rooker's wrong on that. You cannot spin language to take out what Philippa said. You read it again. It is absolutely clear what it says, and it's absolutely contrary to what Michael's now trying to recast it to say. You cannot do that. I'm not going to sue for a stay and have to post a bond, which is what we'd be required to do if we try to stop Brian Reynolds. Michael wants me to sue Brian Reynolds and not sue the city, or we'll be suing the city. This is a constitutional taking problem. You're taking a property right improperly.
That's 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Carmen.
I would ask for another minute if I may. No.
Do we have discretion, Jackie?
Mr. Rooker, is that something they have discretion on?
Yes, I think the chair would have discretion to do that if she wanted to, although I would encourage you to yes, the short answer is yes.
Okay. I want to ask the board, would you like to hear further from Mr. Carmen?
I'll suggest 1 more minute, but
Okay.
no more.
Okay, 1 more minute, please.
All right,
Got it.
thank you. Thank you. This gets resolved really easy. And the discussion of the Brian Reynolds permit is relevant to Cassandra, because if you look at the timing, we submitted for the application timely. Brian Reynolds' application was incomplete. It was defective, it was incomplete. It should not have been processed. We have the only pending fully compliant application submitted timely. Brian Reynolds did not. And for that reason, only our permit should have been processed and only our permit should have been approved. And Brian Reynolds isn't valid. It was an incomplete permit. If they now corrected that deficiency by getting that properly signed, it's going to be under the current date. It's not retroactive. And because theirs was incomplete and we have one in, from a timing standpoint, we're there first. And so for the same reason, again, the denial of our permit should be.
That's a minute, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
thank you for that allowance, Barry. Thank you.
Of course. So we are back to the board for further discussion or action.
Can somebody help clarify for me here then what is under our purview with regard to Mike's concerns and what is not?
Mr. Rooker.
Yeah, so the appeal, I think Jackie summarized it. Jackie suggested that what is at issue is whether or not staff's decision to deny the 5th application was proper. That's what's happening tonight. I do think that Mr. Carmen would have some rights on appeal here to have issues more carefully sorted out. And of course, I will say this, I hope that he does seek clarity on behalf of his client. That's up to him, of course. So
the issue before you tonight is whether or not our decision to deny the 5th permit was valid. Had they been able to appeal whether or not the 4th permit that we issued to Brian Rental was valid, that's a separate issue. And had they done it in the allotted time, then they could be asking you that as well. They didn't, so they can't. So they are asking you whether or not our decision to deny their permit was valid. And we have said that the reason that we denied it was that the PUD is clear that 4 permits can be issued. We've issued 4 permits over time. We can't issue any more. And that's where we are.
So there's no question in our discussion about whether or not this is a 5th permit. 4 have been issued. That's it.
Yeah, 4 have definitely been issued. Whether or not all 4, whether or not all parties think all 4 are valid, they have been issued and they haven't been invalidated by a court or anyone who gets to make that decision. And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm.
I apologize for beating a dead horse, but thank you.
And I have a question. So for Mr. Rooker, so the only party who is the party who can invalidate a sign permit?
So if this board believed that a sign permit was issued contrary to, somebody wanted to appeal the issuance of a sign permit and this board believed that it was issued improperly, that the design of the sign was flawed, or that it was in excess of the number of permits permitted, this board could do that. Furthermore, there are rights to appeal any decision of the Board of Zoning Appeals. We've had that happen multiple times to the Monroe County Circuit Court. And then we've had cases, we just had a case recently go all the way up to the Indiana Supreme Court after an issue was decided by this board. So you can appeal on into the night decisions of the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, in this particular case, there is a window that issuance of that 4th Brian Rental permit, there is a window in which an appeal has to be made in order for this board to be able to weigh in on that. And that window passed and we didn't get an appeal. So this board at this time can't weigh in on that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, before a motion is made, it's still comments, right, Barry?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. So, we often are falling back on the peculiar instance. And in this case, I can completely understand Mr. Carmen's position, which is, he's got a lot of documentation that supports that this is convoluted. We are a board that could have just said, look, we're going to invalidate the 4th permit, but that time has passed. Why? It's irrelevant at this point. Again, the language from the legal counsel, Philippa Guthrie, is certainly weighs into the decision, as does an unsigned permit. There's a lot of things here that are odd. I'm sorry, odd's the wrong word. There are a lot of things here that can be pointed to that show that this is really convoluted and peculiar. We're not just simply talking about who got there first. We're talking about a lot of other issues too. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around how something that started so simple back in 1980 is now really out of whack. So that's just a general comment. I think that it's very difficult to deny the request for this appeal, but at the same time, I don't want to vote on something that's going to allow for a 5th sign to be put up. So what I'm looking for this from this board and maybe from the staff is, what can we do in order to try to get these 2 parties to figure this out, ideally without legal action, so that this can just get wrapped up, as opposed to setting precedents or changing the PUD's sign requirements of 4. Any ideas?
No, I'll say a couple things. You guys don't set precedent, so if you make a decision here, it's just here.
Yeah, I'm
So
sorry.
Mike
I
can-
misused
no, that's
that
okay.
word. Yeah.
Okay, I just for just
my
for those
fault.
who
I
don't
didn't
know
mean
it
that.
as well.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I don't want to do it is what I'm saying.
Either of the mics can correct me if I'm wrong. Secondly, this PUD doesn't exist anymore. So the rules about that's been kind of a thing for staff. We're like, we do think we made the right decision. We, worked with legal. We issued a 4th permit. A 5th permit was requested. We can't issue 5 permits. The PUD's clear on that. It's a convoluted PUD, but it's clear about the 4 permits. But that moving forward for signed permit requests, I believe is irrelevant because it's going to be zoned something else now, is zoned something else now as of last week. I don't know. We've also talked a lot about this during UDO. We can't legislate them being good neighbors or good partners in a PUD. And maybe, as Mr. Carmen said, there's no acrimony and it's just, cut and dry. They each want to sign and that's it. I'm not sure what we can do. As Mr. Rooker has said, we think that what we've done is appropriate. We think that it's clear in the PUD that only 4 signs are allowed. We issued 4 signs. A 5th sign can't be issued. If Mr. Carmen wants to, take that further to try to have the 4th sign invalidated, that we think that's the only option to have that permit be invalidated. We don't think that we can do that at staff level at this point, or that you can do that either.
And there still could be additional sign rights for the property under the now current UDO.
Yeah, so it'll depend on what's on each site already, what signage is there. And so then we would look at what signage is there to see if they have additional square footage available either in freestanding or wall signage. But we would have to do that. Hopefully, if they were to apply for one, they would work with a local sign company or someone who would be able to help them through the regulation, and then we would be checking those things if they were to want to apply.
Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my only other comment would be, I know that some people have come before this board, essentially trying to use us as a pseudo legal decision. They're looking for that in order to alleviate other remedies. At this point, it looks like because of the convoluted ownership issues, that seems to really be the underlying problem here. I don't think underlying property ownership issues are something that the BZA should really be put in a position of addressing. So
Cassandra?
I won't support the appeal based on that.
You will support the appeal. Cassandra?
One other thing that it may not be relevant, but it wasn't clear to me whether the permits go with the developer or the owners, because obviously the owners changed, the developer existed at one point.
Right. So this is part of the problem with PUDs, right? Because when whoever developed this a long number of decades ago, they were both. And so the language was used in a certain way. And so Mr. Carmen is making the argument that the developer owns those rights. We don't think that's clear in the PUD. A property owner can request signs or a building permit or a number of permits, and then we go to whatever the either the regular zoning code, or if they have a PUD, go to those regulations and see what the regulations are. And we do not agree with Mr. Carmen that the developer has sign rights, it is in control of the sign rights for the entire PUD. I'll note that when we've done sign permits for other we've done sign permits for other lots in this PUD as well. It's just not typical for us to then go to the original developer to make sure that those things are okay.
And just to add on that, I think that's at the center of this dispute here, right? We do believe that it's not the developer, but the owner that has sign rights. We are more than willing and Mr. Carmen has made the case, and he spent a long time making the case tonight that in fact, it's the developer, the original developer, and those rights would never transfer in an old PUD like this, the way this PUD was crafted, to anybody else. And we're, as we've said from the beginning, if we were to get a subsequent order from a judge agreeing with Mr. Carmen's interpretation, we would be more than happy to be compliant with that. We don't think that's the case, but of course, you know, we feel as though we've been placed in the middle of a dispute. And as Mr. Throckmorton said a moment ago, you know, I think people are approaching this body asking for a legal interpretation on that question. And I hope that I don't burst anybody's bubble, but I'm not sure you're equipped to make that decision. It really needs to be a judge who decides that sort of thing.
We are not mentally equipped. That's I like that. I'm kidding, Mike. Thank you.
I certainly did not mean it that way.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But I agree with the sentiment. Thank you.
Okay, so we are at the board for action. Or further comment?
Well, I'll move denial of, let me get the right language here. I'll jump in. I've got to get, I know it's AA, but I missed the number.
It's 0321.
Yeah.
Okay, I move denial of AA 0321. Did I get it right?
You got it right.
All right. So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion or comments? Okay, seeing none, can we please have a vote?
So a yes vote is to deny the administrative appeal. Husky,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Clapper,
Yes.
Throckmorton,
Yes.
and Sandberg.
Yeah.
5-0. Thank you.
Okay, the petition is denied. Thank you all very much. It's good to see everyone, and we'll see you next week. We are so adjourned.